assistant, Alice, who's my 10-year-old son here, because I like to wave my arms a lot when I get talking about this stuff. If you could just advance the slide when I tell you we're pushing that, okay? This would be the third test we've done from the dam to try to rebuild and study sandbar habitats. And in fact, as you know, that test occurred just 3 weeks ago. I just mentioned it. And again, these are just some field shots. The Paria in its full glory, moving probably on the order of 1 million tons of sand into the main stem Colorado, typically within a day or so. That's, when it does its thing, it does it big time. And it doesn't just move sand, silt, and clay in the system, it moves a lot of organic debris. We're looking at like the last 18 months, from October 2006 until about January 2008. This is cumulative sand input in metric millions of tons. And for your information, 1 million tons of sand, if somebody came to your house and said, hey, I've got a load of sand, it's 1 million tons, where do you want it? You would need to have a backyard the size of an NFL field, which you all are familiar with, I presume. And it would be stacked to the height of 44 stories. You're seeing in green here, I'll take another opportunity. These are the dam releases. These are the operational patterns under the so-called modified low fluctuating flow. If you did this with less, we would be concerned that it may not turn out well at all because you weren't enriched with enough new sand. In this case, this is what we documented before the test, and it clearly shows at least 1 million tons of accumulated sand in the upper part of Marble. Well, what about the rest of the system? So about 45% of the total we think came in over the 18 months, we think was still basically above mile 30 or South Canyon. We thought that was pretty good news. But some of that sand under operations that come out of the dam every day, of course, moved from upper to lower Marble Canyon. And in this case, we think it was probably on the order of about 200,000 tons that not only moved from upper Marble Canyon into lower, but actually stayed there. Didn't move through, but actually moved through, and some of it stayed. And so we felt like we were highly enriched or well enriched in upper Marble. We were at least enriched to the tune of maybe 200,000 tons in lower Marble Canyon. That also supplied then sand for reaches downstream during the high flow test. Now once we got to Phantom Ranch, or I should say the Little Colorado River confluence, down to Phantom Ranch, we're straddling the 0 point with our uncertainty bounds, which tells us, the way we interpret this, is sand is moving through that reach, but there's no basis for saying any of it's accumulating in that reach, again from mile 62 to 88. Maybe not the best news, but that's what we have, okay? And what about below Phantom Ranch down to Diamond Creek? Well, it's kind of the same story. Dave Coppin uses the term, it's a pipe. And that doesn't mean that nothing good can come of a high flow test in those reaches, but there's just no evidence for anything more than new sand moving through these reaches based on the data we have. So any sand accumulation we think that occurred in the Western Canyon probably came from tributary inputs only, not from the Paria River, but that may have been in the order of perhaps 200,000 or 300,000 tons, which is nothing to sneeze at. Pie chart time. Try to simplify all this gobbledygook for you. 45% of the new sand supply, which we think was the largest sand supply that we'd seen in the past 10 years from the Paria River, was clearly in Upper Marble Canyon. Unfortunately, the story is that under normal operations over the past 18-month period, probably about a third of that whole pie passed the Diamond Creek site. So, one of the big themes on this third test, if you've been tracking this, there was a lot of emphasis on visual identity this time. I don't know exactly why, but we had GCMRC start to build their own motors in the warehouse here. Honda apparently getting interested in developing their own sediment samplers. And so we proceeded with the third test on March 5th. It lasted for 60 hours. It was the same as 2004. Next slide. I talked about capture. We call it retention efficiency. Well, the reality is, from the measurements we've made of the 2.7 million metric tons of sand that we believe we got in, there's evidence, as measured at Phantom Ranch gauge, that upstream of that point, we retained about 10% of it. That's good news. And that's sand that's conserved, presumably in places that won't immediately be subject to transport downstream to Lake Mead. But you say 10%, I mean, that's going to be 50%. This is the problem with high flows. They're a double-edged sword. When you take the flows up, the transport relationship is exponential, and it's not just to the square. It's like to the factor of 4. And so when you take the flows up, sand starts moving, as you know, rapidly. But only a small portion of that, 10%, can effectively be stored in the shorelines. Now in 2004, we found the same retention efficiency as measured above the 30-mile site. In that test, most of the sand that we had, which is about a third of what we had this time, was still above 30 miles. So the capture efficiency or retention efficiency from both tests appears to be similar. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's probably 3 times what the normal capture efficiency would be if the system was unregulated. So the fact that we did this test with both lines above the 0 point, meaning we were enriched, and even despite the high clear water release for 60 hours, both lines, our uncertainty bounds, are still clearly above the 0 point, based on the preliminary data we have. That's good news. That was the result we also had in 2004. And the idea was, if you could do this under the right conditions through time into the future, this gets to Zeke's question, maybe you could incrementally see bars starting to come back. And then the question is, could you maintain that restored condition over perhaps decades? And that's still the big question. The sand budget remained net positive 2 times in a row, 04 and 08, under sand-enriched conditions.